Good afternoon from Hong Kong. We're really delighted that we, Asia Society Hong Kong, can bring you
Recording in progress.
Can bring you this Drive for Resilience series. And today we're going to talk about depression, befriending depression, how to connect with your depressed friends. And we have somebody who is going to share with us some of the experiences that he's gone through. Bill Bernat is a mental health awareness advocate and a TED Talk speaker based in Seattle. And we're really delighted Bill is going to share his evening with us here in Hong Kong. And it's I think those of you who have been following Asia Society Hong Kong program since last February, we've had a series of COVID updates, one of the first organization to do that. And we've been focusing more on the spread of the pandemic or the COVID itself. And this last couple of months, the last 6 months, thanks to our colleague Ching and our business and policy program team, we've been looking into mental health and also kind of resilience, that topic of resilience. When we started COVID series over a year, almost a year and a half ago, we never thought it would still be with us. And it's not just here in Hong Kong. As those of you know, it's a global pandemic, and our colleagues in India, Philippines, around the world are all facing the same type of issues that we have. So Bill being with us from Seattle is actually very much part of the way Asia Society Global Network deals with these programs. So we're really happy, delighted that Bill is joining us. And I think with that, I'm just going to hand it over, and Bill's going to do some presentations or tell us his story of how he is dealing with it, and we can hear more about Bill's experience, and then we'll open it up to the audience for Q&A, the last part of it. And those of you who are on Facebook and YouTube Live, you can submit your questions through Slido, and I will get to it. So with that, Bill.
Okay, thank you, Alice. Hi, I'm Bill Bernat. I live with bipolar 2 disorder, and I am a recovering addict with 12 years clean. As you know, I'm a TED speaker, and I worked for a lot of years until recently in the technology industry. First as a programmer or engineering manager, and then in marketing. And today we're going to be talking about, we say befriending depression for your depressed friends, but it's not just depression. The same basic principles can apply to stress or anxiety or other conditions or emotional struggles. And it's not just friends, right? It could be your family, it could be your coworkers, it could be other people in your general world. I first experienced depression when I was 8 years old, and I verbalized thoughts of suicide, but I didn't know I was depressed. I didn't even know there was such a thing as depression, right? Because as a kid in a world then where we didn't talk about these things, I just assumed everybody went around thinking like, I am not enough and my life is doomed. I thought that was normal, right? So I looked around and I would see like, I would just assume most people were kind of like me. And then there were a few happy people, which was weird. And I kind of judged them for it. Like they were somehow inferior to me because they were happy. I think I thought they were shallow or whatever for a lot of years. And then I realized, oh, I might be slightly backwards on that. But not entirely. I want to show you a statistic here. More than half of adults will experience depression, anxiety, or something similar, a mental health diagnosis in their lifetime, more than 50%. And by the way, here I've changed the faces to both happy and kind of sad, because the people who are experiencing depression or mental health conditions often hide it really well. So you can't tell just by are they smiling or not, whether or not they're having a mental health issue. Now, this is from the US Center for Disease Control. So that means that it's, for the United States, every country and every region will have different distributions and different statistics. And I don't have all that. So I'm just showing you one statistic just to let you frame it properly. This is pre-pandemic though. So we all know that there had been a rise, there's been a rise in these things since the pandemic. Now I'm going to talk about how much the words matter, but before I do that, I want to give you a little bit more background about my journey and what's worked for me. But first I want to help you understand, you know, how bad it got so that you can see how it's possible to recover. So when I started working for NASA, our space agency, in my early 20s as a computer programmer, I was reasonably popular at work with my coworkers, even though I was secretly super arrogant. And when I say secretly, I mean, I was so arrogant that even I didn't know I was arrogant. I just thought I was better than everybody else. Saw something in chat. I just want to make sure this isn't, oh no, I'm going to ignore chats. If something's important, I'll count on somebody to speak to me. So yeah, no, I really didn't know I was arrogant. I just literally was so arrogant. I just thought I was better. And that's embarrassing now, but that was where I was. And in my later 20s, my life started to go off the rails. I had wider and wider mood swings. I kind of hit some, you know, manic highs where I could do things that weren't safe. And I had really severe lows where my depression was awful. And I dealt with it a little bit by trying drugs. And I got into drug addiction, like it wasn't a strategy. I didn't think, oh, hey, maybe drug addiction will help with my mood swings. I was just living moment to moment and grasping at anything that I thought could ease my pain. And I went down a troubling path. And when I finally did get a diagnosis at 29 of bipolar, I didn't get treatment because I thought I was too good to need that, right? I didn't want to get it, but I kept getting worse. So I remember in my 30s being fuming mad as I marched into a meeting I'd called in the big conference room as an engineering manager at an internet company. And before even sitting down, I yelled curse words at somebody. That was somewhat normal behavior for me at the time. So as my condition got worse, as my addiction got worse, I was, I was kind of flying off the rails, and I could see there was a problem, but I was sure that I wasn't the one with a problem. And it was the other people, right? Everybody else was. That's how I thought, because I was an extremely high performer. My team we were under the gun for a lot of critical stuff, and we delivered all the time. So I thought that meant I was mentally healthy. But of course it didn't. And as my behavior became more cantankerous, my coworkers seemed to like me less and less. And that really started to sting. So we'll finish up that journey a little bit later. I want to give you now some thoughts on connecting with depressed friends about words. We have a lot of organizations that say, use this word, don't use that word. Do I say mental illness, or can I say this word? And in my conversations, I've interviewed a lot of people, and I did a survey last year of 110 people in the workforce. And interestingly, they don't really care that much which words you use. Do they like mental health condition versus mental illness? Some people prefer each one. Some people don't like any of these. And it was generally true that people said, hey, as long as somebody means to support me, I'm not going to make that big a deal out of what words they use. So organizations might tell you it's a big deal, but people on the ground don't seem to care that much. There is one thing to keep in mind, and that is to use person-first language. So you're going to refer to the person. You're not going to say somebody is bipolar, just like you wouldn't say somebody is a sprained ankle. You could say they have bipolar, right? This is a person, and here's an attribute you're assigning to them. You could say they're a person living with bipolar. So as long as you're talking about the person first, you should be in good shape. So I'm going to give you a few don'ts, but first let's continue my journey into eventual wellness. So I was out of control, and I'd become kind of a jerk, and I was living very isolated. I was completely alone. I had always had social anxiety, but now I was in drug addiction and full-blown untreated mental illness. And I didn't have friends. I was alienated from my family. And it was a terrible, just numbing depression that I lived in every day. And this is interesting now, it wasn't interesting, that I still didn't think I needed treatment because of stigma, right? I thought if I needed help, it would mean I was like less capable or not as good as other people. And I wasn't willing to make that choice. So instead, what happened is I got worse. I had hospital stays from suicide attempts, and I lost everything to addiction, including my career. And I spent a few years just working odd jobs and barely getting by. And when I was ready to rebuild my career, I didn't know if I could behave normally enough to keep a job anymore. Like, that was the point I had gotten to. I'm like, can I even work anymore now? That's how isolated I was. And then I got an entry-level job in a tech support department, and there's many, many levels below what I used to do, right? And but even so, I wasn't arrogant about it. I just thought, hey, I can't get fired in a couple of months like I did at my last job. So I went from total arrogance to now having total humility. And I kind of felt like an alien trying to figure out how to pass as human. I kind of looked at it like a science experiment. I was like, I'm going to have to just see what works. So I had to learn how to interact with people in a way that was pleasant for them. And it became like math to me, like a big science experiment. And I didn't know if it was going to succeed or not, but I knew that I had to try. So we'll continue that story in a little bit. First, I want to talk about some general don'ts when you're talking to a depressed friend or somebody like that. Don't use a clinical term in a pithy way. Great example is I tend to like click my car when I park it, and then I'll click it again, and I'll be like, oh, is it locked? Then I'll click it. And then I used to joke, oh, I'm so OCD. But I had met somebody who, with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, who explained to me that she had spent nights in away from her apartment because she was afraid to sleep there, because she thought that breathing from across the room would scratch the surface of her new computer. And she gave me permission to share that, by the way. So then I realized, oh, I'm not OCD. Like, I've been joking about it lightly, but it's something that's a much bigger deal. So when you're using a phrase like this weather is bipolar, or choosing what kind of meat to get in my burrito is giving me an anxiety attack, just be aware that people who really deal with those things are a little bit, offended by that or hurt. And so if you want to connect with them, it's going to make them be a little more distant from you. And so if you want to connect with them, don't say it. Don't use a sad voice. This is so common because we're taught to use a sad voice, but you don't want to be like, oh, you're depressed. Wait, let me talk to you now like this. You just want to talk in your normal voice. And this is backed up by the survey. People don't want you to use a sad voice. They don't want you to use a cheerful voice. They just want you to talk to them like you normally do. Don't respond with cliches. This is an easy one, but so important. If somebody tells you they're depressed or feeling anxious, don't say get over it, snap out of it, cheer up. let it go, right? These things have never worked to begin with. Telling somebody to, I don't think in the history of humanity anybody has ever said get over it, and then the person they were talking to got over it. If snap out of it could cure depression, then we could just put up billboards and like 7 billion people would be guaranteed depression free. It's not that easy. And if you use these phrases, somebody with depression or anxiety, most of the time will not let you get close to them. That's a sign that you are not a safe person to talk to. Don't try to fix people. So easy. We're always taught to fix things, especially in the workplace, right? I mean, I'm from IT. Servers down, what? We've got to fix it. But people aren't servers. And you probably can't fix them. And they probably don't want you to try. And you also put pressure on people if you're going to try to fix them, because then they're worried that you'll be mad if they don't try what you suggested or if it doesn't work. So there are times when somebody asks for guidance and it makes sense. But for the most part, you don't need to fix people. People can be sad and okay at the same time. It's really important and it's worth repeating, right? People can be sad and okay at the same time. Not everything has to be changed. Don't ask about meds. This was like 90+% in our survey that people don't want to hear about. So don't ask like medications. Do you take your meds? What meds do you take? Did you take your meds today? People really, you will create distance. There may be situations at work or something where you need to ask, but just be aware. If you do that to somebody, they're going to keep a distance from you in most cases. Okay, now we'll talk about some do's, but before we do that, let's continue my journey. So I went to this job not knowing if I could keep it. And every time I interacted with somebody, I would watch how they reacted to me and what I did. And I would learn from it, like, oh, this got a good reaction, or I'll do more of that, or this got a bad reaction, I'll do less of that. And when somebody corrected me because I got something wrong, I didn't argue that I was smart, which I kind of used to do. I just stayed quiet and I learned. When somebody told me something I already knew, I didn't have to point out that I already knew it. I just thanked them for and because I wanted to be pleasant to be around, so I didn't get fired. I would just sort of give people a pleasant experience in whatever way I could. And as I got better, I moved on to more advanced stuff. Like I held my tongue when I wanted to make a joke at somebody else's expense. When I had a disagreement with somebody, I would ask questions and listen. And the only time I ever yelled curse words was when a couple of guys said that Star Wars could beat Star Trek in a battle. And I wasn't going to stand for that. 2 words, Captain Kirk. And if you disagree, let's bring it up in Q&A. Over time, I finally mastered the one skill that eluded me my entire career, not sending flaming emails. If I started to get fired up and writing, I would say, like an alarm would go off. Danger, lift your hands and back away from the keyboard slowly. And I would wait because I believe me, I used to be pretty bad with flaming emails. How should you start a conversation? Well, in our survey, the #1 thing was to ask if it's okay to ask about it. So if you don't already have permission, you might want to ask, let them open the door. They might wear a t-shirt that says that. They might tell you, hey, I'm dealing with this, or might be more vague, like they're not smiling as much as they used to. And it's situation by situation. That's why I'm saying here, everything depends on context. What's your relationship with them? If it's a coworker, you're going to be very careful about bringing it up. If it's your brother or sister, you might be like, hey, what is going on with you, without asking permission. So it depends on so many different things, but just be aware that as a general rule, if you don't have permission, then you should ask for it, because you want people to have control over how much they're sharing and how much they're not, and who they're letting in on that information. Start by finding something to agree with. They may say something, and this is especially true at work, but it's true everywhere. They may say something that makes no sense to you at all. You're like, well, that's not true. What you're telling, you're like, the reason that you're having insomnia is ridiculous. But don't start a conversation with that, right? If they're telling you, I can't sleep because of XYZ, and you know that's not true, don't start arguing with them. Find something to agree with, like, oh, hey, that bites, I've had insomnia and it's awful, and then you can move forward in the conversation, but start with some kind of touch point for agreement. If you start with argument, they're gonna pull away, most likely. I think of it as yes and, which is sort of the power phrase for improv comedy. Like, they start a scene, you have to say yes to whatever just happened, and then you can take it anywhere you want. Respect people's anonymity. Don't bring it up when there's other people around, and in general, bring it up privately, not in a big setting. That's pretty important to people from our survey as well. Share a personal connection to depression and anxiety. So if you have a brother, whatever, parent, relative, good friend who has been through something, and you can share that information, it will have a pretty positive impact. I can tell you, many years ago, when I was working at NASA, and I was put on like double probation for some behaviors around addiction. And I was getting written up, like my final notice, by my manager's manager. And he said to me, Bill, my brother had a chemical dependency problem. That's what they called it then. Now it's called a substance use disorder. But he said, my brother had a chemical dependency problem, and I just want you to know, I'm really rooting for you. And when he said that, my entire demeanor changed, like my body, I could feel stress going out of me. And I was suddenly like, okay, I'm not lost. I'm not gone. There's hope for me. And it like made me feel so much more connected and included. That one little thing, just that one little sentence was massive. So, and if you've dealt with something yourself and you can share that, of course, that's a huge way to connect. It's okay not to know and to ask. So you can say, hey, I don't know what you're going through, but I care. You can ask things like, hey, is it okay if I ask you what depression feels like to you? I'm always curious. I will. That's one that I use a lot, because I'm so interested in what does it feel, how's that manifesting for you? I use the word manifest a lot. How does that manifest for you? Do you want me to give advice or just listen? That way, maybe they do want advice, maybe they don't, but now you have given them control, so they can tell you what's going to work and what's not, because you want them to have a good experience. If your goal is to let them have that, the pleasure of human connection. And, I will often say, is there anything I can do to support you, right? Because I'm not going to try to fix them most of the time. But I can let them know that if there's something that I can do to support them, I'd be happy to do it. That said, it's important to only offer to support somebody in a way that you can actually follow through on. So if you make an offer to support somebody to do something, and then later you renege on it, that's gonna really sting in a way that you might not understand. I know I had that happen to me once. I was early in recovery, and in the 12-step programs, people are like, hey, there's a phone list and call me if you need something. And it's so hard to reach out. But one day I did, I got the guts to call, and the person was just bothered that I had called and didn't want to talk to me. So I never called anybody again. Thank goodness I got clean and stayed clean. But that's the impact that can have. So don't make promises only if you can follow through with them. And if the conversation feels like it's going haywire, remember, you didn't do anything wrong. You're doing something good by trying to have this conversation. If somebody gets upset or they need to end it, don't take it personally. You are creating a better world by having these conversations. And there are no rules. There's no right or wrong way to do it. There's no list, there's no way to know. You're going to go out there and it's always uncharted territory, basically. So you can say, if somebody looks offended, hey, was that the wrong thing to say? Or you can say, hey, what would you prefer that I say instead? You can just acknowledge what's happening and ask them, because they want to connect, and if you give them that space, then you're letting them tell you what will work for them to connect. And this is a big one, is connect without mentioning work or mental health. If it's a coworker, like, you can just get lunch, not as much because of the pandemic, but we're starting to again in many places. Follow up on hobbies, interests, just talk about something, just chit chat, become friends. I had a friend asked me to, he said when he was depressed, friends would ask him to do things with them, like, help me clean out my garage. So if you, and that's a really, it's kind of funny, because like, you can get free labor out of your depressed friends, but it's also true that people like to be helpful, and that gives them a way to connect without being, without having to talk about their depression, because just having that connection is supporting them. This is an interesting one from our survey. What do people fear about workplace? So if you're talking to coworkers, well, their fears are being seen as weak. What can you do? You can let them know you don't see it as a weakness. You see it as a strength, that they're talking about it and addressing it. They might be afraid of being passed over for leadership roles or promotion. Now, in a good company, that won't be an issue. So you should reassure them that that's not an issue, especially if you're a manager. And this is interesting. The third thing is they're afraid of making people uncomfortable. So this is true not just in the workplace. When you're talking to people who are depressed or anxious, they're worried about you being uncomfortable. So let them know that you're glad they're talking to you about it, and that you appreciate it. So I'm going to kind of bring this story here to a full conclusion. I'm not going to talk about the things that I do with my company, except to say we are doing a survey, much bigger survey this year, to find gaps in perception between managers and employees. And we are offering that at no cost to companies, because we want to get quality respondents. So if that's interesting to you, you can reach out. I'm not going to chat about it anymore here. So as I continued my workplace socialization experience, I found like I needed to give other people time to talk about themselves, which is like I'd gone through most of my life assuming people wanted to hear about me. So now I could see that to have a positive interaction with me, they needed to have equal time. And there were literally times when I would let people talk, and inside I'd be thinking, can I talk about myself yet? But over time, I actually became interested and then fascinated by people's inner lives. And that part of my journey is significant because it's a big part of how I healed and how I stay well, right? I mean, I have 12 years clean now from addiction, and I have been living and working well with my bipolar condition for just as long a time. So recovery is possible. And I did get treatment. And I think the treatment for me was necessary and helpful, but I don't know that that alone would have done it. Honestly, I think that what really helped me feel better was learning how to connect with people. Because I had lived in isolation. It's not only painful, it kind of kills your excitement about life. It can hurt your will to live. And like just a little bit of human connection when you're isolated means so much, meant so much to me at the time. But now, I can see how it's possible to go from being afraid. Like I was afraid to order pizza because I didn't want to talk to a person who came to my door. That's how isolated I was, just to get the pizza from them. Um, and so I did learn over time how to interact with people. And so this is something that you can give to people who are struggling, and you can give it to them right now. You can just be there for them, connect in low-key ways. You don't have to fix them. You don't have to solve anything. You can just like ease their pain by just having that connection. But for me, that is such a huge part of my journey, and what I do to stay well is connect with people. So don't overlook the power you have to help or even change somebody's life just by connecting with them. Okay, that concludes my talk part of tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and take down my PowerPoint and hand it over to Alice.
Thank you, Bill, for that wonderful inspirational story. And I'm so so grateful for your sharing that, and it's that connection. But how do you, this last year or so, how do you find how do you connect in this time of COVID? It's what have you been doing, and what advice do you have? This last year and a half has been so surreal.
Yeah, right.
In the time of COVID.
Well, it took more work for sure. It took a lot more work to have connection. And I didn't have as much connection as I did pre-pandemic, but there were a few things that really helped me a lot. One is I had some family connections on kind of a regular basis. I like to read certain kinds of like motivational or self-help type things, which would be a whole other discussion, right? And so I got together some of my brothers, and every Sunday morning we would do that. And I started, I wanted to work on a creative project. So I found a partner, and we were writing a TV show essentially. And so we would meet regularly to do that. So for me, those kinds of things were pretty big. And I would make an extra effort to see friends when I could, like we'll take a socially distanced walk around this lake. But it was still hard. I'm not going to act like I had it all on lock. I mean, I had some really deep depression during the pandemic. It's eased now. And so I had a lot of things going on, and I'm doing much better now. But I had some really deep depression, and connections with people was really what got me through it. And I didn't even reach out as much as I could have or probably should have, but the little bit of connection I did have was huge for me.
We have a great question here from Slido. I got a friend who has similar symptoms as you just described. And could you please share more of your feeling inside and how I can help him more?
Yeah. Well, for me, it came from a real sense of lack. Like, I think that kind of anger and that kind of behavior for me was really driven by this sense that I wasn't good enough. And it wasn't an ordinary sense of lack. It was like an angry, soul screeching sense of, I have to like prove that I'm okay. And that was really, for me, where it came from. So, I mean, there's more to it than that, more layers and more differences, but at the core, I think that's really it. So it's really hard. I mean, for me to get from where I had been to, learning, I had to go through a really hard fall. And that was very, very painful. Like coming to terms with your denial is not as it's not that fun. It's not as fun as they make it look in the brochures. For me, it was really painful. So I would say the one thing that you can do, I don't know that you can change them, but one thing you can do is to find little ways to let them know they're enough, that they're okay, to give them that sense of affirmation.
Who helped you when you were that low? Or did you seek professional help, or did you? I mean, you were just so low that you picked up the phone. Who is there? Somebody particular, a family member or a friend that helped you when you were that low?
They had tried, but they never succeeded. And they did, like, a brother took me in when I was at the point where I literally had no money, no job, no car, nothing. And he took me in and let me sleep with him. So but really, when I started to get better was when I realized nobody could save me. Like, it was like, oh, they've tried and they can't. And I realized, like, nobody's coming for me who can save me. If I'm going to turn this around, it's up to me. So I literally started saying to myself, Bill, this is your situation. What are you going to do about it? And when I took that ownership, that's when things started to change. And I did get treatment, and treatment helped. I got treatment. I went into the first and most important thing I did was I went into outpatient treatment for substance use, and voluntarily, because I had been before, and I didn't really take it that seriously. It was a thing that I thought, because I thought I could just think my way through addiction, and that I was so much, this is embarrassing to phrase it this way, but it's really what I thought. I thought I was so much smarter than everybody else that I would find a way, even though other people couldn't. But eventually I realized that I would do a lot better to get help, because it was I was running out of options, and I wanted to turn my life around.
We have another question from the audience, from Melissa. Before normalizing the conversation on mental health, what coping mechanism can offer to individuals who are afraid to confront their own mental health issues?
Yeah. Well, there's a few things I would suggest. So now, if somebody knows they have a mental health issue and they're afraid to confront it, that's a different situation than if they don't know they have it. But let's assume they know they have pain. It may or may not be a mental health issue, and they want to address that pain. And they don't want to go see a doctor because of stigma, or because they haven't acknowledged yet that might be helpful, or a psychologist or a therapist, or maybe they don't have access. A lot of people around the world don't have that option. So a few things that they can do are, one is, if they have access to the internet, there are a lot of resources and communities online where people can talk to each other about these things, and that is really one easy way to do it. Another is to go online and look for stories from people who have learned to live or work well. And there are a lot. And I can send some resources if you want. I work a lot with an organization called the Stability Network. They have a lot of stories on their site from people who have, good careers, who've been through really heavy stuff. So that's really can be inspiring, just seeing other people. And I think that also reading books about, self-help, like what is going to work for one person is so different from what would work for somebody else, that I can't say what books to read. The stuff I read seems esoteric to some people. I like Eckhart Tolle. I like Buddhist scriptures. I like these things. For me, are self-help that give me relief from my pain. But a lot of people are like, I don't want to hear about that. Then there are other books for them that work really well. So it's almost like, but there are things you can do if you're not willing to talk about it, and you're not willing to go into treatment, or not able to. There are other things you can do. But the hard part is getting somebody to want to take that effort if they're not if they're not motivated to. Because part of the condition of depression is it can actually make you unable to do the things that would help alleviate it.
It's interesting in your presentation, you also talk about people can be sad, but it seems to be more in the West, and we're so obsessed with happiness. It seems to me happiness is default normal. And I sometimes feel guilty that I'm not happy all the time. And the Western, I think it's a kind of, when you're talking about Buddhism before, and my family's Buddhist and myself Buddhist. But I remember the self-help book that I read about 20 years ago or 20 plus years ago when I had some issue, and really helped me to seek health, to see a psychologist. I started reading the book before I went to see a psychologist. The book was The Road Less Traveled. And I remember that the line starts, life is difficult or life is hard. I mean, it seemed that just seemed the norm. So how do you think in terms of the Western and the Eastern? I mean, sometimes I think Eastern is more fatalistic, but talk about a little, kind of go a bit further. People can.
Yeah, sure. I can give you a sense of my take on it, which, who knows if that's worth anything, but I'm happy to share my experience. Yeah, in the West, we have a couple of things going on that are really hard, that create a lot of suffering. And I think one is this pressure to be happy, and this instead of just to constantly resist what is going on in the world, right? Whatever is happening, if it's not the exact thing that we think it should be, we have to have this resistance. And so that pressure to be happy is really, it's unrealistic and it's unnecessary, because people experience different emotions. This is how life is designed, and to assign some of them as you must resist it all the time, it can be a little misleading, and we don't have and we have a very big sense of individuality. If you have not shown some kind of superiority as an individual, that is considered a bad thing. And so there's this, and that goes on everywhere. It's particularly pronounced in the West, and we don't really have people presenting an alternative perspective. So, I don't want to get too woo-woo, as we say here in Seattle, so I'll stop there. But those are a couple things that come to mind for me.
Well, here's a question from Natalie. I kind of related to this. In Asian culture, mental health is not seen as something worth pursuing. We look about, we try to achieve success and is measurable, financially and all that. But and especially here in Hong Kong, is how much you have materially. What are the steps that Hong Kong can take to help build up mental awareness?
Well, I think the biggest thing that would create more awareness is, I'm assuming that there are people who are mentally ill who are not aware that there's another way to go about it. So the most powerful thing that could create change in your society is to have more people speak about it, and have more people at higher levels speak about it is even more powerful. So that would be the number one thing, is to have people speak openly about it and tell their stories, and to pick stories of people who have lived well, learn to live well, because there are a lot of them out there. My story is not remarkable at all, in the sense that many people have been through similar journeys and have found a way that works for them to live well. So that'd be the number one thing I think people can do.
I find that very interesting. Especially this last month, we've heard about Naomi Osaka talking publicly.
Yeah.
First mental, and also I think Prince Harry, a lot of celebrities now seem to be talking about it, and in some ways normalizing the discussion, which I think is healthy. And so I think that's another reason I think programs like this is helpful, is that it's not abnormal to be sad or to have some of these issues. So I think I think you're right about speaking about it. But I think this is another interesting question, anonymous, from our audience. Did you feel uncomfortable or scared when you were disclosing your depression problem to your family and friends?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially early on, I thought that it would create a distance. I thought that I was going to be less of a person. And I thought that it was, yeah. And so I was scared how they would react. Absolutely. Now I'm not. Last year the pandemic was hard, and I had some months where I was dealing with some pretty bad depression. And, even though I'm an advocate, it was a little bit hard to acknowledge that to my family, but I did. And even though I'm an advocate, it was hard to say, I think I need to see a psychiatrist again and maybe go on meds. But I did. So these things they can be a little bit scary, and it's not that easy. But the way I looked at it was, this is what's happening. I'm not getting much done, and I'm spending a lot of time dealing with my emotions, which now I can deal with them. But if it takes all your energy every day, you don't have a lot of room left. And I'm like, this is not a great way to live. So yeah, it's scary.
Freddie here says, I love the distinction between pithy and clinical phases. Do you see a difference in workplace mental health conversation compared to in a relaxed social setting?
Yeah, I see a really big difference. People are very on guard at work because stigma is still real in many, many workplaces. And, somebody's job is, it's not just a source of self-esteem, but it's a source of income. It's how they're putting a roof over their head. If they have a family, it's how they're feeding their children. So they don't want to mess that up. And so what we're seeing is slowly but surely, people who are in positions where they're not likely to be impacted by a disclosure are disclosing for the sake of others, right? And that's that organization I mentioned, the Stability Network. That's what they do, is they have people in the workforce talking about it. There's another organization, there are a lot in the UK actually, some really good ones there, where they get leaders of companies to give a talk or acknowledge that they've dealt with this sort of thing, or that they still deal with it. And when they do that, they make it a safe environment for people to talk about these things. And the reasons to do it are manyfold. We know that about $1 trillion a year per the World Health Organization is lost in productivity to depression and anxiety. We know so many statistics about how important it is for a company's own success to address these things instead of ignoring them, but it's still happening slowly.
Well, it seems to me with COVID now, corporates or workplace are paying more attention to this. I mean, maybe the trend was already there, but has COVID this last year and a half, and especially people, this last year, have that contributed to be a corporate being more aware of employees' mental health?
I think it has. And I think we have mental health adjacent terminology that people can use more freely, like languishing or burnout or exhaustion. Like those become ways of talking about it without acknowledging it, right? You're not saying I'm depressed or I'm having mood swings, but you can say I'm getting kind of burnt out, and then nobody's going to put you in a bucket of somebody who has a mental health disorder. So, but I would say that's happening, but also people are disclosing more openly because now they're like, it's more common. They can see that other people are dealing with the same thing, so they're less afraid. But it's still pretty taboo in a lot of workplaces.
Well, here Natalie asked, okay, in the workplace, should people with clinical depression be obligated to disclose that they are depressed, including declaring meds?
Including this, declaring what?
Declaring that they're taking medication.
Oh, I don't think so. Well, is you just asking my opinion on that? I don't think they should.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're just asking my opinion, no. If they're in a role where they're operating machinery or something like that, where there's safety requirements around them, then you might need to ask if they take meds that would affect that. Although none of the meds that I know of do. There probably are some that do. But aside from that, no, it really should be about, are they doing a good job? What's happening with them internally should be their business to share only if they want to. And a lot of people who live with mental health conditions are your highest performers. 'Cause they can be extra driven, extra focused.
Right. And like you said, you yourself were a high performer, but kind of hit it well, or at least you dealt with it. And but here, another question is, what can be done on the executive level for employees to feel more comfortable disclosing their mental health issues and troubles?
Yeah, for sure. The thing that can be done at that level is, number one, disclosures from executives is the most powerful thing they can possibly do. That would create a feeling of safety company-wide really quickly. Beyond that, HR will do things like they'll put out a campaign, it's okay not to be okay, or they'll do different things to raise awareness and just to let people know that they have resources and here they are, and it's okay if you're dealing with that stuff. That's also helpful.
Um, Val asks, how has normalizing mental health conversation positive or negatively impacted your well-being?
Yeah, it has positively impacted my well-being because I realize I'm not alone and that it doesn't mean I'm broken, which is how I felt at first, right? At first I thought, oh my gosh, I have bipolar, I'm never going to belong, I'm never going to fit in. And I had a lot of shame around it and so I felt very, very alone, and I felt like I was somehow inadequate. And as we normalized the conversation, I realized I'm not alone at all in having these kinds of issues. And as we saw in the stat earlier, I'm actually in the majority. We just don't talk about it that much. And then this idea that, oh, it doesn't mean my life is doomed. Like, I'm a valid person who's fully able to contribute and do things well, just like everybody else. And I do belong. So it's that sense of belonging. Now that I've been talking about it for like 30 seconds, that's the word I'm landing on, belonging.
Okay. That's a good word. I belonging. And here we have anonymous asks, a friend is becoming depressed as she never asserts herself, never gets angry with others despite being hurt. I think it's a boundary issue. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's hard for me to weigh in on something like that. I will tell you this, it could be a boundary issue. And if it is, I did a podcast with a worldwide, an international boundary expert. And I said, okay, tell me, what's the secret to setting boundaries? And she said, well, it's actually very simple. What you need to know, but it takes like 2 years after I explain to people how to manage boundaries. It takes about 2 years for them to actually do it. It could be a boundary issue. It's hard for me to say without knowing more about the situation. And also, I'm not I'm not a clinician. I'm not a trained psychologist. So I'm sorry that your friend is going through that, though, and I wish I had something more useful to offer, but I wish you both well.
Okay, and another question came in. In university students with mental health issues, they are provided accessibility, I guess, to health and mental health specialists. How do you think workplace? Oh, the question jumped away. How do you think workplace can better integrate this kind of awareness? It seems like universities are paying attention, but we're not hearing that much about it from the workplace.
Right. You're not. And I think that, it really comes back to the more people disclosing, and they could also have more programs where people are able to talk about things that are meaningful to them, but under the guise of it's not about mental health. So like we did a small group storytelling we led at Microsoft, and these were not, it had nothing to do with depression and anxiety, but it was in COVID. It was, our theme was the pandemic. And but some people brought really deep stories. So there would be different ways to create opportunities for people to talk about things, or create events that are adjacent. So like you have a resilience event, and then in companies they can talk about things like social health, emotional well-being, resilience, preventing burnout. So they can have more things like that that are, people aren't afraid to go to. Because if you have something and you call it a mental health event or a mental health awareness event at your workplace, people know if they go, they're like the person who went to the mental health event. And then, of course, not to sound like a broken record, but the people who come out, especially at high levels, and tell their story has the biggest impact.
I think that's really interesting, the storytelling angle. I remember when I lived in New York, and this is shortly after 9/11, and StoryCorps is something that they still do. They kind of setting up a kind of a listening booth near near downtown New York, and people just kind of telling their stories, sometimes crying. And I think it became a radio, and StoryCorps is still on I think on public broadcasting or whatever. But that storytelling of normalizing, I think sometimes we have good days and bad days, but as trauma, I think it seems to me right now with COVID, we're all going through this together. You can't imagine not one person this year and a half have been happy. I mean, I know personally good days and bad days, and then bad days reaching out to friends. But I think your story is really inspirational. But right now, I want to also talk a bit of it. We only have about 4 minutes left on two areas. What I find interesting is, I think social media. I think but also media. You've talked on TED, but social media in terms of the positive and negatives. I know a lot of young people. Social media has made them less. More obsessed about, and I'm sure it has contributed to depression in young people. But then I'm sure there are also tools that are out there. So can you talk about the impact of social media on mental health?
Yeah, I see it goes both ways, right? And what you were talking earlier about this pressure to be happy, social media can really reinforce that. You're like, oh my gosh, so-and-so is having so much more fun than me right now. I must be doing something wrong. I'd better pose and have fun. So that's a common trap. And, the people can deal with that in any number of ways. One of which is to start following these mental health awareness advocates, because there are a lot of people on social media who are like, just talking about what they're going through or giving you upbeat things. And you've got a lot of people being very real and very honest about their stories in a very public forum. So even if you're not ready to go into a public forum, you can totally use your social media as a way to feel better about life, to know that you're not alone, and to maybe learn some things about your struggle, maybe meet some people. So that's the easiest. I mean, social media, I haven't solved I haven't solved my own head tripping around social media, so I don't have a lock on that, but I do follow a lot of mental health awareness advocates.
That's good to know. I think there are things that positive, things out there as well. So, and going back to podcasts, the boundary issue, we have Anonymous coming back. Thank you for your comment. We'll try to find the podcast. Any details on the podcast would be great. So if you can provide that with us. So
I can follow up with that. Sure.
What we'll do is after this talk, some of the resources you have, love to share with our audience, because it's a topic. We're really delighted that our people are dialing in from Zoom, our members, and we're also sharing it with the public via YouTube and Facebook. But I think right now we're coming to an end. But I guess one of the last questions I think I talked before we started was about the elderly. I think we talked about social media with the young, the elderly, and we talked about our parents. So how do you think during this time of COVID, how do we also help our elderly get through this. It's trying times. I mean, we have tools, technology, but if you can kind of talk about that, and then I think that will be my last question.
Sure. Well, I mean, my experience with my mom and my brothers is that just getting us, whether it was on a video phone, or we tried a lot of technology things, but if she could see us and hear us, she was like so happy. That full experience of having her boys present was there. So, you know, and it's easy when you're living your life to forget how hard it is for somebody who's elderly and isolated. So, you know, if you can set up a schedule or be regular about checking in with them, it will make such a big difference to them, because it's hard. I've been in isolation for years, and so I know how hard that is. So, and you can really make a big difference with not that much of your time. You know, you spend 15 minutes and you make a huge difference.
Well, thank you, Bill, for those, wise words. I just got done a few weeks ago, 3-week quarantining, coming back from the States in a hotel. And I have to say, my coping mechanism was every night I scheduled a Zoom call or a FaceTime call with a friend or family member. And it made that 3 weeks go by a lot quicker. So the connection, and I think even more than ever now during this COVID, is that connecting with our friends and family. And, you know, if there's issues, to talk about it. But I think your sharing, your story has been really helpful to us. And I want to wish you good luck and hope to have you back in the future. And but thank you so much for sharing your really great stories. And I want to thank our audience for joining us today. And have a good day. Bill, any final words before we sign?
No, thank you for having me on. It's been a privilege. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. And we'll see you at future program like this. We're going to talk about resilience. It doesn't look like COVID is going away anytime soon. So we're going to continue the talk about the COVID update on the scientific front, but also on the mental health front. So thank you all for joining us. Good afternoon and good night.
Cheers. Good morning, evening, etc.